Hello there, thank you and welcome to another edition of the Evening Review. My name is Okito Craig and in studio with me this evening, Miss Rejoice Amutenya. She is the founder of the Institute for Inclusive Digital Futures. Rejoice, how are you today?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you, Okito?
I'm very well, thank you. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself and about your passion for consumer protection, for digital literacy and for billing transparency.
All right, so my name is Rejoice Amutenya. I'm 23 years of age and I'm a technologist, researcher, and digital policy advocate. So my background in academics is in computer science and informatics, and I'm currently pursuing my public policy postgraduate diploma. And my journey into digital policy started quite early. At the age of 17, I became a member of the Microsoft African Council for Digital Good, where we were advocating for internet safety and cybercrime. And 2 years later, I became a youth envoy for the African region at the International Telecommunications Union, which is the UN agency for ICTs. So those experiences really shaped my journey into the digital policy landscape, particular to Namibia and the African region at large. We looked at issues pertaining the telecom sector, telecommunication, digital transformation. But I think one key thing that I've seen that is really a gap within the country is taking into account how people on the ground actually experience some of these systems. So part of the things that I took up growing up until now has really shaped my journey into consumer protection, digital literacy, etc., etc.
Okay, excellent. And tell us about the Institute for Inclusive Digital Futures. What is that?
All right, so it's an institute that I founded earlier this year, and it's a policy and research institute, right? It's focusing on Namibia, but we do have plans of also expanding to focus on the African region. But it's to really just address the gap which I picked up, which is technology, public policy, and digital consumer protection. We often at times hardly find people putting all those things into one box, right? Yes. So we want to look at how can people experience systems better and how can also operators, for example, ensure that the systems are better catered for the consumers on the ground.
I think it's a very timely topic. And you've been doing some research into billing transparency. Why?
All right, so it started off as an experience that I've experienced as a consumer myself. And also growing up, I've been fortunate enough to have traveled to a few countries. And being a technologist myself, I always look at how other countries are doing things. And then I look back at home to say that, okay, we are not doing that. Why is that the case? So one of the issues that I picked up as a consumer myself is that, my airtime is always disappearing and I never understand why. And seemingly so on social media as well, you'd find people complaining, be it on Facebook, on Instagram, also at school, 1 day, 2 days, people would be complaining about my airtime is disappearing. Why is that the case? So knowing that I've experienced how other countries do their things, I was like, okay, wait, I've seen how Angola does their things. I've seen how South Africa does their thing. They don't experience such issues. Why can't we also adapt to whatever frameworks they have in place? So instead of just being a frustrated consumer, I was like, all right, let me turn that frustration into evidence-based research. Let me document people's lived experiences into a policy report that can then inform the policy reform in the country pertaining billing transparency and just the telecom sector at large.
Okay. It is a widespread problem. Even this morning, my colleague was complaining because there's a MTC wallet that she usually uses. She buys more than enough at the beginning of the month and then stores it in the wallet and then uses it as the month progresses. And this morning she got a report that the wallet is depleted. So it's not, you're not the only one. But I wanted to find out, how far have you progressed with the research?
So the research is progressing quite well. So earlier this year, I started with the research. I launched a consumer survey to just understand people's lived experiences and then analyze that data to see what are the patterns, what are the recurring patterns. And then I've also looked at the legal and policy framework in Namibia that protects consumers against, these discrepancies. And then I've also engaged a few stakeholders, CRAN included. They've given me a few reports over the years to look at. I've also engaged one of the experts in the region, Ms. Nomande Kongheba Sipoa. She's the Senior Policy Manager at GSMA. And yeah, so the research is progressing quite well. So the first draft is also ready. So what I'm doing now is I'm just busy planning on hosting a stakeholder validation workshop and invite all the stakeholders, including the regulator, the operator, academia, just to present the findings to them, and then for them to also challenge them if need be, so that they are aware of the work that I'm doing. And then after that is conducted, I will then go ahead and publish the policy report.
Awesome, awesome. Just to take a step back, you mentioned about policies and laws that protect consumers. Being a born and bred Namibian, I didn't know there was anything like that. Is there any protection for us consumers?
Yes, so you would find that in the Communications Act, CRAN is mandated to regulate the telecom sector, right? And within that, you'd also find a few consumer protection frameworks. We don't have a consumer protection law yet, but we did do provision for that in the in the Communications Act. So you'd find that currently, as we speak, the system is the framework rather, is very reactive. It waits for the consumer to experience the harm, notice it, and then write it down or document it somewhere, report to the operator that ABC, I'm not happy with this, my airtime disappeared. Wait for the operator to get back to you. And if you're not satisfied, or if they did not get back to you within 14 days, you can then escalate the matter to the regulator, which is CRAN. So you can see that that whole entire framework is very reactive. It only reacts after the consumer had already experienced the harm. And what I'm advocating for is to have frameworks in place that are proactive to ensure that before a consumer even experiences the harm, they're already protected.
Okay. From your research so far and the impression that you've got, is the problem so widespread? And then secondly, what can be done with your research results once you are finished?
Yes, you can see that, the issue is widespread. I'm not the only one. You are not the only one experiencing that. On a daily basis, people complain that, my airtime is disappearing, my data is disappearing, the network is too slow, so many complaints regarding, mobile data and connectivity. And that in itself really requires a lot of work to be done by the regulators, by the regulator and the operator as well. So what the research aims to do is to inform the policy and the current frameworks in place. So CRAN can then, have a look at my report and say that, okay, these are the lived experiences of the people, these are the patterns, and perhaps we could take some of these recommendations that I've made in the policy into consideration. We see that in other countries, for example, they give consumers an option to opt in or opt out, meaning that if your data deplete and you have airtime left, should we continue billing you on your airtime, or do you want to top up? And what we currently find happening in our country is that once your data deplete, or just before you even decide to buy a data bundle, your airtime is already being depleted. So if you look at it, you could also say that, that's a very contradictory model we have in place, because as an operator, you are offering data bundles for consumers to purchase, but at the same time, you're also billing them on their airtime. So where do we draw the line? So my policy report really just aims at, informing the policy reform in the country around the matter of mobile data billing transparency.
Okay. You've mentioned CRAN a couple of times, and we recently heard that CRAN is doing an investigation into our biggest mobile service operator, MTC. What do you think about that investigation? And from your perspective, can you help us as the general public understand why now? We've been complaining for years and years. Why now would CRAN investigate?
That's a very tricky question, but I must say that I'm actually very impressed and happy to see that the regulator is, taking these proactive steps to ensure that, consumers are heard, their complaints are heard, and they are taking the necessary measures to ensure that, if anything, the operator is also compliant to what they've already laid down in the Communications Act. But also, to answer your question as to why now, I don't know. I think the matter is now, a lot of people are aware of the issue, and they are now constantly on social media, tagging Crane, tagging MTC. So perhaps the matter might have reached their communications department, and then they were like, okay, we have seen that, people are complaining, let's do something about it. Or maybe because they also have a framework in place, remember, in the Communications Act, perhaps they've been receiving a couple of complaints. So they were like, okay, we're receiving complaints. Let's address the issue. Let's call in the operators and see what the issue is and how we can then go about ensuring that consumers are not experiencing this type of harm.
And just from your preliminary results now in terms of the research, is it limited to MTC, or is it across the board in terms of the service providers that we have in Namibia?
It's across the board. The survey was open, so as a respondent, you had a choice to choose whether your operator is MTC, telecom operators, or one of the two, or all of the above.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Rejoice, and thank you very much for being with us. We'll take a short commercial break, but be right back to break open this contentious issue. Please stay with us on the Evening Review. Welcome back to the Evening Review. My name is Okito Greg, and we continue our conversation with Ms. Rejoice Amutenya, the founder of the Institute for Inclusive Digital Futures. Ms. Amutenya, despite being only 23, you've had quite extensive experience in the fields of digital literacy and consumer protection, and even looking at billing transparency. But I want to ask you, what can the average Namibian do to better protect themselves in this current reality where everything is digital, where we don't enjoy that much consumer protection, and we are sometimes victims of opaque billing practices?
All right, just before I answer your question, I think the end goal is to then ask the question, how are the systems protecting the consumers on the ground? Because right now you'd see that the burden is on the consumer,
yes,
right? So as a consumer, if you have experienced, your data disappearing or your airtime disappearing, there's only one thing, unfortunately, that you can do, which is raise the issue with your operator in writing, as stipulated in the Communications Act. You write to you document what you've experienced, the timestamps, the airtime that was, that disappeared, the amount, and then you put it in writing to your operator to say that this is what I've experienced. How was that the case? Can you explain it to me as to how I lost that airtime, for example? Or you could also go to their home shops. They also do issue itemized bills. So perhaps maybe you could see how you utilized your airtime or your data. But if that's not enough, you could always write to them, and then they will give you a clear explanation as to what happened. And if by any chance, if you're not satisfied, you can then raise the issue or escalate the issue rather to the regulator. So as far as our frameworks are concerned, that is what an average consumer can do. But then again, we have to understand that not everyone on the ground knows that this is what they have to do, right? Not everyone is, knowledgeable about this process in place. That's why they resort to, social media. Some people are far in the regions, where connectivity is really, really hard. They only had their few $20 left, and now it disappeared. So they stay in silence, waiting to get the next few dollars again to then recharge in attempt that they can then, subscribe to a certain data bundle. But the framework that we currently have in place, it's that you need to, raise the issue to the operator. If you're not satisfied, you then raise it to the regulator.
But this is not a new issue, as I've said before. And from a media perspective, we have approached the operators before and gotten answers like there's background apps that you have to switch off. And basically, it was always the consumer's fault because we didn't use our cell phones smartly. Do you think there's truth in that?
Yes, to a certain extent, of course. Background apps do play a role. System upgrades do play a role. And, it utilizes the data. No doubt, it utilizes the data. But then the conversation is around, airtime disappearing. And one way that we can, ensure that that is not the case is giving a consumer the option to opt in or opt out. Because we live in a modern world. So as soon as I'm connected, my phone will start updating, background apps are running, I'm getting notifications every now and then. So, the moment my data depletes and I have airtime left, tell me as a consumer that you have now depleted your remaining data bundles, your balance is 13 Namibian dollars. Do you want to top up, or should we continue billing you on your airtime? And then as a consumer, I will be aware. But as of now, for the most part of it, we are not aware. Because if you and I were aware that our data bundles are depleted, what we would do is then, switch off our mobile data, and then up until such a time where we can then subscribe to a new data bundle.
Yes. It does seem to me a little bit disingenuous in the sense that I've always understood airtime to be one thing and data to be something else. And airtime for me is like being able to call somebody and maybe send an SMS. And data is what I use to access the internet. And that understanding comes from the service provider. Since the beginning that cell phones have been available in Namibia, that's how they've explained it to us. But now for them to treat both as one, and the money that I pay is suddenly interchangeable, it seems a little bit sneaky.
That's true. So with data, disappearing data, or often at times consumers say that the data is depleting way too fast or it's too slow. That's a quality of service issue.
Okay.
And then you'd find people complaining about disappearing of airtime. That's a consumer protection issue. So with the disappearing of data, the reason why it's a quality of service issue is because as stipulated also in the Communications Act, CRAN does provide, some sort of framework surrounding quality of service to ensure that operators are operating or are rather rendering their services out to consumers, and there is a requirement for that. So as consumers, we can't experience low connectivity or way too fast connectivity. And then with the disappearing of airtime, that's a consumer protection issue, because as a consumer, you are purchasing airtime,
yes,
right, in hopes that you then subscribe to a certain data bundle that is being offered.
Yes.
But before you can even do so as a consumer, you're already being billed on your airtime, and
yes,
that's the issue at hand. Consumers are not protected. Their airtime is not protected, and airtime goes a long way. It's just not $5.
I want us to zoom out a little bit more and look at the impact of our current digital landscape here in Namibia on social development. How do you think the situation that we are in Namibia is affecting the development aspirations of the country?
All right. Looking at Namibia, you'd see that we have a high unemployment rate,
yes,
right? So if $20 disappear from, consumer's device, that's just not a $20. This is a job seeker who is perhaps refreshing their email, yes, every now and then, waiting to see an interview meeting, for example, yes, invitation, or a business owner who is trying to, communicate with their customers, or even use mobile banking, or a student who's trying to submit an assignment. So the moment we have such discrepancies on the ground, right, it it hinders, the progress of the country in terms of, digital transformation and digital inclusion. People then are excluded from participating digitally.
Okay. What do you think is the biggest weakness in terms of Namibia's current approach to consumer protection in the digital space, as far as mobile data billing is concerned?
Like I've mentioned, the framework that we have currently in place is very reactive. It only kicks in once, as a consumer, you have experienced the harm. And I think, to me, that's the biggest weakness. Because you can ask, are we then really protecting the consumer if we are only kicking in after they've already experienced the harm, right? So that is the biggest weakness. And my hopes is to then have that reformed, to have consumers protected right before they even experience the disappearance of airtime.
So would you advise a new institution, organization, maybe a office of government or some agency that is proactively protecting consumers, or how would you advise that the problem be addressed?
Not necessarily. CRAN is mandated to regulate the telecom sector, and even if we look at how other countries are doing it, the regulators would then kick in and say that, okay, consumers are complaining about ABC. How can we then, step in and ensure that operators are not, are not designing systems in a way that, consumers are having to complain every now and then.
Yes.
So it's really up to the regulator to step in, perhaps do the research, understand the current landscape, learn from our sister country, South Africa, and every other country that has mechanisms in place to protect consumers.
Okay, let's go back to you, Ms. Amutenya, and I'd like to find out what are your plans for the rest of the year in terms of your institute and your other work in this space.
All right, so my priorities are quite set up. So first is to ensure that I publish the policy report on mobile data billing transparency. So I will just work on finalizing the draft and then present it to the stakeholders. And after that, I publish it. And then for the remainder of the year, I'll just, continuously do research, not only on mobile data transparency, but also on the telecom sector widely, to see maybe what other issues are consumers experiencing, and how can we better ensure that the consumers are not experiencing some of those issues, and then also just look at how other jurisdictions are doing it, and then we can take it from there.
Do you think that the technology, especially communications technology, is it making the life of the average Namibian better, or is the average Namibian being excluded more and more? I'm asking that question in the context of our extreme income inequality, our very divided society. Are we leaving more and more Namibians further and further behind?
Not necessarily. Like, this issue is just, pertaining mobile data transparency and how an average Namibian can, participate in the digital economy. But as far as communications is concerned, widely, I think as a country we're doing quite well. We have programs in place that, educate ordinary citizens on how to, operate the computer, how to, search on Google, for example, to close that digital literacy gap. So if we have to look at it widely, I think we're doing good as a country. Of course, we can build on from there as well, because we live in a modern world where technology is increasingly developing. But pertaining now the issue of mobile data transparency, I think that's a gap that I've picked up, which also has to do with communication, if you think about it, just an aspect of it. And if we get it right, then I think we will be progressing well as a country.
You used a phrase that I find very interesting and intriguing, the digital economy. But that's exactly what I'm trying to get at. I suspect that most Namibians are not participating in a digital economy, because how do you earn money from digital anything? We can't even bill, we can't even, in what sense? Who's participating in this Namibian digital economy?
The moment you take your device and, start browsing on social media, for example, or you tweet something on Twitter, or you partake in a conference call on Teams or Zoom, that's you partaking in the digital economy.
It's me paying.
Yeah, you're paying to participate in the digital economy.
But I can't benefit.
Well,
do you think one day we'll be able to? What is the biggest? Why can't we?
I think
we are too few.
Yeah, we're too few. I've heard, a few people say that our population, hinders us from, making money from the internet. And I think I've also heard the Minister of ICT say that they're in continuous engagement, with the relevant stakeholders to ensure that one day in the future, our creators can then earn income from just, doing their own thing on the digital economy. But as of now, you'd find few creators which are getting paid to do adverts and whatnot. So there is that source of income. But then we would also want to reach a point where YouTube, for example, pays our creators.
Okay, we're almost out of time. Would you leave our audience with a final message, something that they can take home and think about?
Yes, for sure. So as a consumer, always ensure that, you hold your operator accountable. If you don't understand any billing issue on your phone, or you feel like you're being billed not rightfully so, always feel free to reach out to them, email them, and they can take it from there.
Thank you very much, Ms. Amutenya, and thank you very much for joining us on this edition of the Evening Review. Until next time, good night.